have the pleasure of introducing tonight's speaker. Peter Carroll is, depending on where you look, head coach of several NHL football teams, an occultist and practitioner of charismatic theory who believes in three-dimensional time, a photographer who enjoys capturing the beauty of Western Canada. And according to one Keith Berry, Peter Carroll has a razor-sharp wit, which can only be matched by his extraordinary mind-reading and magic ability. His campaigns on fuel cost and justice for retired Gurkhas featured extensively in the national media. Now, we of course all know better. But what does strike me about Peter is the sheer breadth of his engagements in the fields of architecture. As a lecturer at SAUL, almost from its inception days, Peter was and is involved in teaching from first and second up to fifth year, and has infused his knowledge and his enthusiasm into, well, looking around all of you, basically, here. Peter also is a driving force behind Tullamore Ireland that aims at fostering interest in the ideas and heritage of the modern movement in this country. He's recently opened an exhibition on Andy Devan's work at UCD, showing off the work of SAUL students. Well done, Peter. Excellent. Well done, students. Peter is also a micro-developer and client of architecture. But you'll be seeing some of that tonight. And Peter is untiring in his dedication in pursuit of architectural quality. Along with Crevan Murphy, Peter is principal of 8 architects based in Dublin, and it is in this capacity that Peter will introduce the latest example of their highly successful practice here tonight. And as some of us know, Peter likes to swing the microphone every now and then. Without much further ado, Peter, over to you.
Short time, as they say. Thank you very much, Jan. It's a very pleasant introduction, and I'm very honoured to be able to speak as part of this series. By no means was it ever meant to be a self-promoting exercise to include it in the Lecture SAUL series, but as it happened, we felt it was important to include some examples of recent architecture that has been kind of headlining various matters. I'm going to talk tonight about our only competition winning scheme in the office. We've been in practice now for 6 years, myself, Crevan as directors, Joan McGilligan as our associate, and all our many collaborators, many of whom are here in the audience. We always like to have SAUL students, and most recently Aidan O'Dea is our year-end student who is instrumental, I would say, in this competition, in his model making skills and drawing. They say that it takes about 10 competitions to enter before you win one, and that's exactly what happened with us. We entered 10 competitions to date, and luckily enough, this has been our joy, particularly in very, very difficult times. And we find, as a very young practice, it's very, very difficult to get public work of any sort, because primarily government bodies and other public clients particularly don't trust, maybe not don't trust, that's maybe a little bit hard, but you don't have a track record. And looking to other European countries, there is a precedent of supporting young and up-and-coming practices, and the only way, and an invigorating way in Ireland to get work, is through competition. There's only 2 or 3 competitions, maybe 4, maybe 5 every year, and they vary in scale from playgrounds right through to civic offices. And our professor here, Mary Buchholz, is a prime example of somebody who has gained tremendous experience and a breadth of scope of work from that competition process. So I feel like I'm a child of all of that, still in my almost 40th year. without saying too much further personally, this competition happened during a very difficult personal time emotionally for me, in that my brother passed away in March of this year. So I was primarily kind of focusing on this competition as an emotional outlet, if you like, a vehicle, and certainly his energy and his enthusiasm for life kind of shows through, I hope, in the competition, and he'll always be remembered for that. So I'm beginning with a building that has fascinated me since my beginnings as an architecture student, and you'll all be very familiar with Cordoba Mosque. It's the Cathedral Mosque, they call it, because it's an overlay of a Roman Catholic Christian cathedral onto a Muslim mosque. And rather than talk about the kind of the symbolism of the cross within the plan, it's primarily its abstract nature that has always fascinated me. And it's a building of 856 columns in total, from varying stones such as jasper, onyx, marble, granite. A very, very simple perimeter wall, a very platonic shape, if you like, and that has always attracted me. The very, very simple form that it has. The built form itself is 120 square meters squared, so it's about 24,000 square meters in total. It's a monumental building of many kinds. But what interests me most, I suppose, is its multiple uses. It's not just a place of worship over time, from the Al-Andalus Muslims to a place of gathering in the Plaza de los Naranjos, here in the courtyard of the mosque cathedral. And it was also a place of learning, and they used to teach varying kind of groups of people in this hypo-style hall, multi-columnar hall. And it was also a place of prayer. You have many prayer niches, and you have the mihrab facing unusually south as opposed to southeast, east towards Mecca. And it was also a place of law courts. So in many ways it was this very, very, very important civic building, and it was an open carpet, if you like, large forward in the town. And for that reason, it has always fascinated me. And it was one of the reasons why I went to Spain to work. I am fascinated by the mixture of both Muslim architecture and early Christian to late Christian architecture through the Reconquista. And they have an incredible heritage that's there, and it's still used. This is the inside here. You can see that the raw stone columns of varying kind of types of stone. A very simple section, which has a horseshoe arch with a semicircular arch over it. And I suppose I'm showing this here primarily to show the kind of extent of ground floor, and the fact that the section is divided into two zones. You have the column and you have the arch. And it's effectively 3.5 meters and 3.5 meters again of a zone. And that's something that will show through in our Tullamore Arts Centre. It's something that holds with you all the time. This is the section here, and you can see the division in section from the column through to the overhead elaboration and arch. And what I like probably most about the mosque itself is its juxtaposition with the old Jewish quarter of the town. It's this very forceful, square, platonic shape that hits and meets streetscapes and makes all these wonderful urban spaces almost accidental the whole way around its perimeter, while holding on to this very, very clear, formidable shape in the centre of the town. And it's something that has kind of lived on in competitions through our office, and I'll show one or two examples of that in a moment. The other project that I've always been fascinated with is the Danteum by Giuseppe Taragni of 1938, and she was asked by, or maybe forced, some people would say, by Benito Mussolini, and Taragni was Mussolini's state architect of the time, to build a monument to Dante Alighieri, who was a poet, who wrote the most beautiful poem of many people would say of all time, the Divine Comedy. And again, what I like about this is its juxtaposition with various shapes and forms within the urban context, such as the Colosseum, Trajan's Markets, Trajan's Forum, all of the old imperial Rome that you see in the bottom of the site plan. And you can just make out the Dantean here. And unfortunately I couldn't get a site plan that would have more focus, but it's ever so tilted and linked to the local context. So it sets up this very, very energetic shift in plan. And in a way is, I suppose, a metaphor for all the shifts and kind of toing and froings of all the emperors that have made impact on this part of Rome. What I also really like about this building, again, is its very, very simple, clear form and its tectonic. Immediately you can see there's an interest in the making of the building. And down to its coursing of ashlar stone, you can see the banding of a band to 3 bands to a band to 3 bands. And the various staggerings and coursings of the stonework on the outside elevation. But equally intriguing is its plan, and something that I've always been intrigued by. No model or drawing will ever kind of satisfy my intrigue for this plan because it's so mysterious and abstract. And I suppose it was a translation of a translation. The Dante's Divine Comedy was very much structured around Byzantine churches, as it is said to be. And this is a translation of that translation in that here is Tiragni thinking about the structure and the rhythm and the form of the Divine Comedy in a path from dark hell through purgatory up into paradise. So you have this very interesting intramural relationship between spaces. You don't know whether you're within a wall or whether you're within a room or whether the wall is supposed to be read as a singular wall. Just a very, very intriguing thing, and it's more the interstitial space, if you can try and describe anything in there that is interstitial. It's almost like every single corridor space is useful of some nature. But I particularly like the strong graphic of, again, this multi-columnar space up on the top left through to the massive columns of purgatory and this kind of weighted ceiling and this very, very interesting section up above. So quite a kind of compact form, yet quite spatially rich and intriguing. And if I can jump onto a project which we almost won last year, which was the Europlan project in Ballymun in Dublin. And they were looking for 50 residential units and the reuse of a boiler house, which was the central heating plant for all of the local authority flats in Ballymun. And rather than knock the boiler house, which the majority of the contestants decided to do, we decided we would keep both the chimney, the boiler house, and there's many vestiges of that kind of latent history that Ballymun had and is beginning to lose slowly but surely because of its regeneration programme. So we proposed this very, very strong square form. It's something that appears again a lot in our work, this very simple form. A bridge that connects a number of intended linear parts across Main Street. So it was meant to be a counter-access, and we interlock with this floating roof which had penetrations within it to allow for light to come through. Again, I cannot say how important another student in the college year was of this project's development, and that's Sinead O'Shaughnessy. I don't know whether Sinead is here tonight, but she was instrumental in this project coming to fruition. And like a competition, you only have 2 or 3 weeks to throw your hand at something, so you really are using all of your capacity and all of your ability within a very, very compressed, shortened time, and under many demands as well, given that we have the practice and that we all teach as well in the practice. A very simple metal form with concrete pores that kind of mimic or have a mimetic relationship with the concrete column of the central boiling house. We turned that into a studio, and we kept the red colour because of this very, very distinct kind of emergency red colour that it had. And the chimney, of course, being close to Dublin Airport, was to uphold its kind of red and white branding. So Tullamore, a place I had actually never been to And John, I swear if you tell this to anybody or Offaly County Council, a place I had always very, very strong desires to go and visit because I had heard that it had a very, very striking architectural built heritage, and when I went there I was not in any way disappointed. My memory of Tullamore is that it's a town in the Midlands, and when we decided we would enter this competition, the first thing we did was try and Google it and try and find where it was in Ireland, and this very, very distinctive orange bog or colour kept on appearing in all of the Google Maps. And only today I was downloading this with Deborah in 5th year, and it's something that is immediate when you see something from the sky. And what's very, very beautiful about this landscape is that you have these scored patches of ground, and driving past them is a sheer joy in that you get these rills of water and milled bog. A lot of these bogs in and around Tullamore have been commercially milled. So you have kind of cuttings into the ground, and it's got this beautiful red-brown intensity that we're very, very keen to expand upon in the competition. Again, there can be no greater joy than building on the Grand Canal in Ireland. I mean, many of our finest buildings have been built along this stretch of man-made water, and it was certainly a driving force and a driving factor in why we wanted to do this competition, to add to that legacy of culture that we've built up throughout our time from the early 18th century. John, I'm not sure exactly what date Grand Canal dates from. 1780. Interestingly, Tullamore was the end point for the Grand Canal until they decided to extend it on to Shannon. So there's a basin in the town that has interesting echoes to the heritage of our art centre. There's a kind of a negative space in the town itself. This is just really to show the kind of emphatic line of the canal. You can see the blue line up above running through the town and making various quirks and bends as it hits various landforms. And beside, as you can see, there is the small green spot within the town, so it's slightly in the backland of the town, not necessarily the most important part of the town, but you have the main street here, Cullenkill Street, and you have Patrick Street, and various important churches in and around the town, and you have this wonderful charitable estate that they hold Castle Peninsula in every summer. So a very interesting setting. This is the town itself. You can see the basin I was just describing here. It's about 45, 50 square metres in size to allow for the barges to turn and to go back out. It would have been a miniature version of the Grand Canal Basin in Dublin. So you had this kind of like relationship immediately with Dublin. Quite a formal street. You can see very fine urban spaces like Market Square. You have the main street leading on towards the jail and all of the later 19th century extension of the town out towards Carroll Estate. And here you see the site with this very, very prominent grove of poplar trees that were over 30 metres, 40 metres in height, and quite formidable in size. So that was one of the factors that we had to deal with. Here's the site from Clontarf Road. Something that the competition brief didn't highlight at all was this very, very handsome terrace of Frank Gidley houses, the Bordnamona architect. Somebody who's very, very underrated in Irish housing terms. Very, very interesting mixture of gable and elevation, roofscape particularly, a very, very kind of three-dimensional and developed sense of roofscape. And again, you have this beautiful body of the Grand Canal that is at a height in relation to the site of Kilbride Park, which is where our art centre is, to the left-hand, the right-hand side. So the water level is higher than the park, so you have this very interesting kind of sectional relationship. And from the other side, you have the Tullamore Dew Art Centre, or the Tullamore Dew Whisky Distillers Art Centre. And I suppose this is a kind of another vestige of the great kind of industrial heritage that Tullamore had built up, primarily around the traffic of the canal. And it's a very handsome some stone building, and it's primarily now more a visitor centre for Tullamore, which is met in other parts of the county and in the country. So, I suppose, thinking about what was stirring us, this is a bog cutting, for anyone who doesn't know what it is. Basically layered up and raised bog. You can see the cuttings and the markings of the shlea that cuts into the bog, and it's being collected here by one of the turf cutters to be laid out and dried. What we liked about this was this long, striated sense of elevation, and not necessarily something that you appreciate as a built form, but certainly an intriguing biological kind of phenomena where one cuts right into the ground to make this very kind of interesting mix of a dry to a very, very wet facade wall. And then various things like stacked timber and the smell of timber. Not necessarily related to Tullamore anyway, but just more an interest in, again, line and measure and calibration. To a work by Joseph Albers. This was parallel lines, or front line, I think, as it's called. And while they're not immediately relevant, they are things that you bring to the competition. They're abstract notions that you bring to your work, and you try and develop them through your architecture. So the plan that we developed, this is important, it's a two-stage competition. The first stage was entered by 119 entrants. Many of them, I believe, are in the audience among our teaching staff. No tomatoes. And that was whittled down to 4 in the second stage. And yeah, obviously, you know the results. But this is the plan of the space. Relatively free-flowing, an amazing brief. Really, really intriguing. It was a 250-seater theatre that had to be expandable and contractible in relation to seating. You had 3 arts rooms, 2 of a medium size and 1 of a very large size. You had a gallery with a workshop and gallery space beside it to allow for, I suppose, more participation than exhibition of arts. And I suppose the clients in this particular instance were trying to drive home a different typology to the typology that has been developing over time in Ireland in the last 10 years. Now, I'm not being personally critical of that, but it was very much a kind of an interest within the brief that it was to be somehow different, not to be only attracting shows and foreign kind of investment of arts into towns like this in Ireland, but very much trying to get from grassroots up. So it was to be something that everybody felt they could approach and work in, study in, read a book, do their homework, paint a painting, compose a poem, write a piece of music. Again, like a lot of our plans, we tend to be relatively bold with our plans because we found in the last 5-6 years that the majority of our projects are inevitably eaten away by an economy of means, and the project, unrealistically, some people might say, but we're particularly intrigued in the challenge of that. We're being asked to build a project of 2,200 square metres, or roughly 2.3, 2.4 million expat. So you're talking about a budget per square metre of less than a standard Department of Education secondary school. So you're looking at there blackwork and plasterboard and, you know, as many exposed surfaces as you can. No false work, no drop ceilings, no hidden agendas anywhere. So in a way we took that to heart and made a very, very, what we think was a clear and compact form. Now you can see there's a dotted line coming around the space, and that was always trying to retain this 48 square metre shape. We were trying to reduce the amount of circulation within the space. You have an entrance from the town, you have an entrance from the Tullamore Centre, where buses would arrive. You have a relationship directly to the canal, and particularly because it was north facing, that provoked a kind of interesting discussion for us in stage 2. You have the theatre that faces towards Kilbride Park, and you have various administration areas and an arts So in a way, unlike the court of a mosque, it's a square form, but it has a very, very strong relationship on all sides through the arts rooms onto this kind of triangular space that we're developing here and onto the canal. So something reactive, yet permeable and flexible, and it was there from the start. And our plan changed very, very little beyond that, beyond a few technical aspects that were accommodated. So this was stage one model, and I'm going to show you the panel. It was 1A1 submission. So in many ways you might make the most beautiful models, you might make the most beautiful drawings, but you really have to sell yourself through as punchy and as impactful a presentation as you can. We had a lot of engine power in our office, what with Aidan and me. So Aidan was brilliant at making models and crafted some very beautiful facades for the models. This was supposed to be an all-timber building. We were trying to make this both an essay in sustainable but also quality architecture going forward that would represent a new kind of not just a new arts centre type, but a new way of moving forward town. So the competition panel itself, you can see here, we start with just kind of an overview, some elevations, some key images, a site model showing the kind of line of the canal being the kind of driving force behind this whole thing, the plan on the top corner, and then a series of models showing the kind of various sides and facets of the project. So not going into too much definition on many things, but understandably for 2 weeks' work, we were pretty delighted to get into the shortlist. So having got into the second stage, we started to think about how are we going to develop this, because you get so attached to something from a very limited period of time to develop it up within 6 to 7 weeks into something that you would happily show and get costed and get engineered and get landscaped. So we had quite a lot of difficulty in the first few weeks trying to loosen ourselves up and trying to make sense of how we might develop this thing, because obviously we felt it was perfect. You know, there's no question it was perfect. We did not want to change it. So I'm potting with nothing serious. This was about a model the size from my hand to my hand, about 3/4 of a metre long. Again, a very quick, simple model to show the kind of extent or the effect of this very strong architectural bomb, as Yvonne Carroll very kindly called it, about 2 weeks ago. Yvonne, of course, was one of the other shortlisted entrants with Shelley McNamara of Grafton, and Yvonne from Tullamore, along with Jared Carty from Tullamore. I had there was a few tense moments there, a few difficult train trips up and down to Dublin, but in very good spirits. They congratulated us, so that was nice. You can see the simple form. It's 4 blocks, effectively, which became 3 in the end, and they all spin around a central space, which is the foyer. So a 48 square metre plan is a very, very deep plan, and to get light into that central point, we were interested in making something that would be the new centre for the town, effectively, that everybody could come in and out of. So we thought of this kind of pantheon light, a very, very strong centralised, and I'll talk about that in a minute. We worked with Dermot Foley, landscape architects. We worked with Dermot previously on the Lisbon architecture tribunal. He was one of the contributors, along with ourselves, to that particular exhibition back in 2007. And like anything, when people begin to interfere with your scheme, you're totally offended. And all of a sudden, all these like lines and scrapes across the site started to appear, and I was like, Dermot, what the hell are you doing? Why are you proposing all of this? But you begin to soften into, obviously, you're working in a team. As an architect, you have to work in a team. So he had this very nice notion about, lines coming from the townscape, lines along the canal, very simply blocks of limestone and concrete, sometimes suppressed into the ground, sometimes rising to bench height. And then other times lines that would terminate in a tree, and one specimen tree that we grew, which was an oak tree, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. But like everything, it takes time to digest landscape architecture, and particularly when we were thinking about something only from the point of view of form and shape and use. It was interesting to see a further development of that at a landscape scale, particularly in a park, an urban park like this, pocket park. So there was very beautiful drawings made by them, incidental little things like permeable footpaths. We're proposing a suds system for the park that will collect all of the wastewater from the roofs and will drain into a drainage system that will prevent any kind of attenuation on the site. So in a way we're putting as little pressure on the public sewage or drainage system as possible. And again, Dermot and Simon in Foley Landscape Architecture were developing this kind of notional idea of a path breaking down and a kind of a blurring of division between planted area and a paved area. And again, very, very simple concrete pavers, because that's what the budget would only allow. So eventually it settled on a kind of a half-baked scheme where we were getting things that we wanted and he was getting other things. One thing we kept within the site was this footprint of an old quarry. A lot of the limestone for local churches and for all the infrastructural works like the bridges crossing the canal came from this site. And up until the late 60s, early 70s, it was a rubbish tip. So we very much impressed upon the jury that this was really the only place to build, because you never knew what might happen if you were to build on a dump. And that was kind of an interesting kind of like point of discussion, certainly when it came to the jury writing their report and considering the other entries. We had a notional environmental strategy where we would collect rainwater on the roof of the theatre to be collected in a tank over the control room, and that would feed all the toilet block underneath and any of the sinks to the arts rooms around the space. And we're provisionally wiring for solar panels that go south. We can't afford the solar panel, but we're providing for the wiring. And then there's a biomass unit in a semi-sunken basement closest to St. Kieran Street here, which is kind of the only real kind of place where we could manage to put it. But it will be interestingly developed in the next number of weeks and months. We also worked with a terrific engineer, Tom Gray. Some of you will be familiar with Tom from Merit, inviting him to be out for many of the reviews. And Tom is not just an engineer, I think he's a philosopher as well as an architect. And he has this wonderful ability to be able to kind of like whittle down and summarise what the structural intent is in a project. And I've seen him work with students, particularly in 4th year and 5th year, where he's able to kind of like get to the core of the architecture and the making of it. So he came up with some very nice ideas about the roof structure. Notionally, it's to be this bound perimeter form with 3 volumes that pop up beyond the perimeter form. It's overlaid with a kind of a frigid cross pivot form with a system of beams, and then somehow they're all brought together into a kind of a more complicated and ambiguous roof plan, which is a mixture or a medley of all of these 3 notions. And like it seemed like the obvious thing, but when it was drawn for us, it was a kind of a revelation, a revelatory point to make. So I think that's like the most satisfying thing about working in a design team. As an architect, you're working with an engineer, a cost consultant, a mechanical and electrical engineer, a landscape architect, and all the various specialists. And when you're working in orchestration with all of them, it's a truly remarkable feeling. So he did all of these axonometrics very, very quickly for us within the first few weeks of the project, trying to again summarise the various moves. This is an overlay of a perimeter laminated beam, which is to be 3.5 metres high, and cantilevering out to erode all of the corners of the schemes, and they brace all of the 3 volumes together. This is a the ribbon element, and you can see Tom's little caricature there in the end, the kind of the box with the ribbon tied around it. And this is to be the kind of core 10 steel band that we were bracing everything with eventually from a weathering point of view. And then the overlay of a secondary structure, which are these 1.5 metre deep laminated timber beams that take all the tertiary joists or curtain beams as we're calling them later on. So obviously with a beam you can only do so much of a length before you need to consider supporting it from underneath, and with timber you have to consider the length of a tree, which generally tends to be 4.2, 4.5 metres in length. So we worked with Tess, and that's Tom's company in Paris, and he developed this very, very nice system of volumes, beams, support columns where we were requiring them, and the secondary and tertiary beams. And then very nice drawings from Tom again, which are always present to open up on your computer when you get them. They completely summarise everything, and you're just forced on to the next stage then in terms of development. Now I'm no expert in bending moment diagrams, but maybe Miriam in the audience, I don't know whether Miriam is here. Yes, Miriam, you might be able to explain something to me here, but I mean... Positive and negative, yeah, very good. I mean, I don't understand it, but I love it. It's just one of those kind of intriguing diagrams, the working of it, the forces at play. And it's really interesting to see all the secondaries at the moment developing kind of like similar kind of thoughtful processes through pieces that they're studying. And we were going through a parallel exercise last year, and fifth years were developing their pieces, and I felt I was doing my own pieces with Queevon and Joan and everyone in the office on this particular project. So thanks to everyone in a kind of a side way for kind of inadvertently supporting this. This was the junction of the secondary beams, which were the 1.5 metre beam laminated timber beams, and then you have these very, very fine thin curtain beams, which are 75 mil thick, and they're braced with these knobbies, if you like. I don't know whether you've ever taken down an old Victorian ceilings, but very often they braced the joists together to prevent or buckling or twisting or any kind of lateral force in them to stabilise them. So we were thinking very much on a very basic principle level of how we might brace the deep timber beams together. All that we could afford on the ceiling was a raw aluminium deck that would be going from beam to beam. And we were very, very keen to offset any of the carbon footprint of the construction. So we are insisting on a ceiling roof on the top. So hopefully we can act almost like a bog in itself as a kind of a carbon sink to the building. So going back to a few other kind of notional ideas that we wanted to kind of maintain. I've spoken about the bog, and this is an example of the lined landscape delineated. We have Irish Triskelions, which some of you will be familiar with, these kind of spinning dervishes and wheels, and kind of representing this kind of interactive place that we were trying to encourage, kind of almost interlocked with one another. We had the old Crown man, this notion of a skin, a kind of a very resilient, weathered skin, and draping a complex structure, which was the skeleton, obviously, of the man. And it was something that we kind of repeatedly kind of referred to with our core 10 steel cartilage to the building. And then one last example, which was the King's Oak in Charleville Estate, one of the oldest and largest oaks in Ireland and Britain. Equally, it's got a span or a crown width of 48 square metres. So there's another kind of like complementary form within the town. And we liked this kind of metaphor of being underneath something that had its own support system. So very much the soffit of our interiors were meant to be like almost a tree. And then other forms within the town, obviously we had long barge boats, and this was one that was parked in the Grand Canal Basin, and we actually met this guy in the opening night in Tullamore, and he was ready to paint his boat and decided he can't paint his boat now because it's referring to the art centre that's going to be on the way, so God damn it, says he. So our form, in many ways, is just from an elevational point of view, very, very simple. It's all drawn with horizontality in mind, and an accent, a counter accent to that, which is this beamed roof system, and we were keen to strip off that piece of the elevation to reveal the kind of support of the beam onto this larger 3.5 metre deep beam. Along the base, we were making a limestone base, which is probably going to become board marked concrete now because of cost. Apparently, it's quite cheap now to do board marked concrete, lo and behold. At different corten steel panel heights to the lower part, so you're getting a kind of a tighter dimension to the 3.5 metre deep beam to the volumes that pop up from that. So again, very, very slight but kind of subtle differences in the making of it. This is just going around the art centre, so you're getting a continuous beam the whole way, and you're keen to work the signage of the building into it. Cleveland is a big fan of 60s illuminated kind of pop lighting, so he was very kind of much into the lettering and the kind of signage and the integration of artwork into the building as something that is not meant to be a work of art, but something as a developing form within the town itself. We integrated the twine as an idea of a billboard to the town side. This is the elevation to the south, and you have the stepped area here that comes down to the town. It's about 1.2 metres height difference. And if I can just go back a second to the last one. One important point was we were very keen to maintain the datum height of the canal bank. So everything is flat and accessible, universally accessible inside. And then any of the developing kind of changing that happens towards the town. So this allows for pleasant south-facing stepped areas to the town. And then twisting around to Kilbride Park, the theatre doors, which were to be openable, they wanted a reversible stage. So we were keen again to use that opportunity of the stage door to develop artwork. And we chose one of Louis Le Brocqui's garden tapestry paintings for that. As long as he doesn't sue for use of work and fine. These are some of the models again. We spent a lot of time developing the model. If you can think back to the timber stacked facades that we had in stage one, we now have a corten ribbon that dresses the whole building and gives it that kind of weather protected skin like the old cotton man. We had to notionally suggest a bridge crossing the canal at this particular point. So we were interested in making this kind of sculptural form that would both respond to openings in Frank Gidley's housing as well as form bookends to town spaces that we were making. So you get this kind of like quite dramatic triangular form space with the old mill tower of a flower factory. This is the beginnings of the Tullamore Community Arts Centre. And this kind of like very clear, simple form, and we purposely made the model without the roof to express the structure and the rhythm of space inside. And you can see in the centre of it is this, as I was describing it, this little Pantheon roof light. And I know we went to Rome there a number of years ago with our students, but there's something very, very striking and strong about coming into a relatively darkened space to have this oculus in the centre. And in a way, it becomes in itself an art space, in that the theatre, the arts rooms, the gallery and the cafe all react and around to that. We have to maintain all the poplar trees, so we pushed the building back. Originally we had proposed to get rid of them because we liked the proximity and the potential for reflection from the canal water, but we were forced to keep it. So that's going to be an interesting scenario there as to how we maintain the root system of trees that are over 30 metres high and are only 10 to 12 metres from the building itself. Some other views, this is again from Clontarf Road, hanging over Gidley's housing and looking towards the park where you have these blocks of limestone and concrete, and the bringing around of the promenade into the park and allowing for a terrace that faces west in the evening time. So we were conscious that any theatre going, any concert going, any gig going crowd would enjoy the setting sun in the evening time and the potential to open up these doors to the pocket art within the town itself. And then this is looking from the town side. And you can see the sets of steps coming down here that make up the difference, and then the ramp that comes around and within the sculptural kind of Z shape to bring you back to the same point. So the plan itself, the only thing we did was kind of decorate it with some surface. We decided on a concrete polished floor and to cut in the expansion joints or the saw cuts into the floor to give it a measure as opposed to just pouring the floor. And some timber floor was required. There was a sprung floor required in the theatre, in the arts rooms equally. Timber was required, and in the cafe. And we decided we would kind of extend it and make it a slightly larger cafe than was required. And the gallery and the gallery workshop, again, you can see are quite central to this space, the common foyer space with a very large roof light overhead. So everything effectively means that this is the centre point of the scheme, and it effectively reduces the amount of staff required from this entrance and from the entrance to the town. So it's one single focus, and the director with the administration wing to the south. So again, you can see very, very little circulation in this. This is the clean rooms and dressing rooms to the theatre that have access to the stage. Very little circulation here, and this is meant to be the kind of the route from the town, slightly compressed and opening up into the foyer as it makes its way towards the canal. So inside, this was a large 1:50 model which we only completed there last week. And this shows the kind of scale and the kind of rawness of the space itself. And we're very aware that the money will need to be kind of like stretched as far as it can on the scheme. So we're keen that everything in its capacity can be exposed. So we have these what we consider to be very thin and elegant, kind of deep, thin columns, or beams, of curtain beams, and then the secondary beams, which should be picking up, they're not picking up in this model, but they'll give another measure to the space. Obviously, with a repeated roofscape, you're given the opportunity to bring in as much natural light as you want. So there's an interesting kind of features pattern across this whole roofscape, and that was something that we were very interested in developing this kind of almost elaborate roofscape, because we knew it would form a very important part of the sense of space within this building. So this is the large roof light that I was talking about. And these are some of the cuts to bring in the south light into the cafe. Obviously, we wanted the cafe to be as close as possible to the canal, but it would be north facing. So the only way to do that was to counter it by bringing in south light. We didn't have any south light in the stage one, and it was something that was very constructively suggested to us by the committee. And then obviously you have large hopes into the gallery space, the workshop beyond, and then small things like children's corners within the cafe. This is the gallery space. Again, it's quite effective to make models and take photographs of them. You can get very, very realistic, clear senses of space. Again, very keen to promote local things like the Book of Carroll. A disc that was found in the bog, a drawing of a photograph of the King's Oak in Charleville Estate, and a work of art by a colleague of ours who's very much interested in energy and power, and we were thinking, given that we were working in the centre of the bog, to include one of John Gerard's work as a kind of a push forward in that sense. This is looking from the cafe out towards the canal, across to Frank Dibney's housing. You can see the height of the water being quite proximate to the height of the floor of the cafe. One very, very simple counter, like a block, of the park, effectively a bench-sized block that was meant to be the server unit. And you have this kind of dramatic system of tertiary joists or curtain beams, as they're called. And then looking back towards the west, you have the south sun coming in, and you have this view towards Kilbride Park. And here we just have an elaborated kind of children's corner. And obviously, because it's a stage 2 competition, we're kind of pushing the local events, so classic flutes are featured very heavily. And then the theatre, very, very simple space again, not much money to push on this. We chose again a banding of plywood for the walls internally and reflectors to the ceiling, with the exposed beams again to soften the sound, and various things like retractable seating again. This is the collector for the water, and it's been brought down through the control room back area and into the toilets. So quite clear back. And this is a photograph of the Joe Dolan concert, as we were calling it. We were trying to find a plastic man that looked as much like Joe Dolan. Again, you can see the kind of narrowed bands up to door heights, and beyond that then the increment of the panel gets larger. So the scaling up, like many facades that you get in classical buildings, we were keen to give a measure to these kind of relatively simply adorned walls inside. And then to complete with some perspectives that we got developed. Here you can see the footprint of the quarry as a step height element that will feature within the park as a kind of the ghost of the former quarry that was so important to the town. Here you have a relatively low maintenance canal side with the blocks of concrete and limestone. You have the terrace of the cafe coming around and making slow steps down to the kind of service entrances to the art centre, and things like the family are relatively obvious. And coming from the Tullamore Jew side, you can see again the eroded corner, some artwork that we integrated in. This is the Irish Triskelions again, and this notion of development which will happen of the promenade along the canal. And one thing that we were keen to develop was this specimen oak. Poplar trees aren't necessarily the kind of native tree to the Midlands, and they were purposely put there for functional reasons to reinforce the embankments of the canal. So we were keen again to have a dialogue with the King's Oak in Charleville estate. So maybe over the course of the lifetime of this art centre there will be a similar plan for everybody else to rest under, and it's on axis with the entrance. So there's a nice dialogue between the tree that's growing and the art centre that's developing as a centre for amateur and professional art. And then to finish on the photograph of the community art centres. And again, it's important for us, the fact that they said it was a community art centre as opposed to an art centre made a huge difference to us entering the competition. We felt it was an interesting kind of point, albeit subtle one, that they were pushing this more democratic, open and permeable reflexive form within an Irish landscape. So that's all. Thank you very much.